12 souls vanished into the emerald abyss of Acheron. 4. A planet officially classified by the United Earth Space Command as an unsurvivable deathworld. For 3 grueling weeks, the galaxy mourned the Horizon 7 expedition. That is, until a solitary human casually strolled out of the tree line, carrying a woven basket of fresh fruit and walking a 6-eyed apex predator on a makeshift leash. The official accident report filed by the Bradford Lowell conglomerate would later blame a spontaneous atmospheric ionization event. For the 18 crew members aboard the Deep Space Survey vessel Horizon 7, it simply felt like the universe had suddenly decided to swat them out of the sky. It was October 14th, 2248. The Horizon 7, equipped with state-of-the-art Boeing Yamaha sublight thrusters, was supposed to be conducting a routine orbital scan of Acheron. 4. The planet was a vibrant, violently green marble in the Perseus Arm, flagged by probes as rich in rare earth minerals, but heavily designated as a Class 9 deathworld. Its biosphere was notoriously aggressive, but orbital scans were supposed to be safe. Then, the ship's navigation mainframe simply cooked itself. Captain Richard ordered an emergency manual override, but the Boeing-built thrusters had already locked into a fatal descent trajectory. The ship tore through the upper atmosphere, shedding ceramic heat tiles like dead skin. In the cramped, flashing red interior of the command deck, humanity and their integrated alien crewmates braced for the end. When the Horizon 7 finally slammed into the planet's surface, it didn't hit dirt. It crashed into the shattered canopy, a dense, interwoven layer of colossal flora that resembled weeping willows, except these trees were the size of ancient Earth skyscrapers. The branches, thick as suspension bridges, broke the ship's fall, tearing the hull into 3 distinct pieces before dropping the primary crew module into the dark, suffocating undergrowth below. Miraculously, 18 survived the initial impact. But survival on Acheron 4 was a relative term. The moment the emergency hatches blew open, the crew was hit by a wall of heat so oppressive it felt like breathing hot soup. The air tasted of ozone, rotting vegetation, and an underlying sweetness that Medical Officer Chloe instantly identified as airborne neurotoxic pollen. "Masks on! Environmental seals, now!" Chloe barked over the hiss of ruptured coolant lines, her hands shaking as she clamped her own respirator over her face. The crew huddled in the mud, surrounded by the groaning, smoldering wreckage of their ship. Among them was Nathaniel Locke, an unassuming human cargo specialist. While the alien and human scientists of the Bradford Lowell team panicked, Nathaniel remained eerily silent. He had spent 10 years in the United Earth Aerospace Marine Corps before retiring to private sector freight. He was built like a cinder block, with quiet, observant eyes. But he was just one man without weapons, stranded on a planet where even the moss was carnivorous. Within 48 hours, the true horror of their situation crystallized. The ship's main distress beacon, manufactured by Lockheed Martin's Deep Space Division, had been housed in the aft cargo bay. That section of the ship had snapped off during the descent and landed roughly 10 kilometers north of their current position. Without it, they were ghosts in the cosmos. Worse, their concentrated emergency rations had been destroyed in a plasma fire. They had water from the ship's filtration reserves, but no food, no comms, and limited battery life in their plasma rifles. On the morning of the 3rd day, a decision was made. Captain Richard assembled a retrieval team. 12 of the most able-bodied crew members, including Nathaniel Locke, Navigator Arthur, and Engineer Simon, would trek through the jungle to find the aft cargo bay, secure the distress beacon, and retrieve whatever rations had survived. The remaining 6, including Captain Richard, Chloe, and Comms Officer Beckett, would stay behind to fortify the wreckage and tend to the wounded. "We maintain strict radio contact," Captain Richard ordered, his voice echoing hollowly through his respirator. "Every 30 minutes, you ping us, Arthur. If you see anything move, you shoot. The biological scans of this planet show 0 safe fauna. Everything here is an apex predator." Arthur nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. Nathaniel stood near the back of the group, a heavy titanium pry bar resting casually on his shoulder. He didn't look terrified. He looked deeply, intensely annoyed by the humidity. At 0800 hours, the 12 departed, swallowed instantly by the shifting, claustrophobic wall of green. For the 6 survivors left at the camp, the jungle was a psychological torture chamber. Acheron, 4 did not sound like an earth jungle. There were no birds, no chirping insects. Instead, there was a persistent, low-frequency hum that vibrated in their dental work, occasionally punctuated by massive, unidentifiable roars that shook the leaves. The flora around them moved even when there was no wind. Thick vines, slick with bioluminescent sap, slowly crept toward the warmth of the wreckage, requiring the crew to hack them away every few hours just to keep the camp clear. For the first day, the radio pings from the expedition team were a lifeline of sanity. Camp, this is Arthur. We've covered 2 kilometers. The underbrush is thick. Locke had to pry open a massive fern that tried to snap shut on Simon's leg. We are progressing. We are progressing. Camp, this is Arthur. Hour 6. We found a stream, but the water is highly acidic. We're losing daylight quickly. We're going to set up a perimeter. 1. The night on Acheron, 4 was absolute blackness, save for the predatory, neon glow of the toxic fungi. In the camp, Chloe sat by the shortwave receiver, her eyes bloodshot, listening to the static. On the second day, at 1,400 hours, the pings stopped being routine. Camp, Richard, are you there? We are being tracked. Arthur's voice was breathless, panicked. The audio feed picked up the sound of heavy, frantic footfalls through deep mud. Arthur, this is Richard. Report. What is tracking you? What? I don't know. We can't see it. It's in the canopy. The radio crackled with interference. It took Leonard. 1 second he was behind me, the next. Just a spray of blood on the leaves. No sound. It didn't even make a sound. Chloe clamped her hands over her mouth. Captain Richard grabbed the mic. Arthur, form up. Defensive circle. Use the thermal scopes. Thermals are useless. The ambient heat is too high. Locke is. Locke is telling us to get into the mud, to cover our heat signatures, but Simon is running. Simon, stop. Oh God, it's coming down. A horrifying, guttural screech tore through the radio speaker, so loud it forced Beckett to rip off his headset. It was a sound that defied biology, like tearing metal mixed with the roar of a jet engine. Then came the chaotic staccato of plasma fire, screams of utter terror, and the sickening crunch of breaking bone. Arthur, Simon, Nathaniel, anyone, respond. Richard screamed into the mic. The only answer was a wet, heavy tearing sound, followed by absolute, chilling static. The 12 were gone. Days bled into weeks. The camp descended into a grim, starvation-induced lethargy. The 6 survivors rationed their water to a few sips a day. They tried eating a seemingly harmless blue tuber that grew near the wreck, but it caused Comms Officer Beckett to go into violent anaphylactic shock. It took a heavy dose of Chloe's dwindling medical supplies to save his life. After that, they stopped trying to forage. They realized the terrible truth about Acheron. 4. It wasn't just a harsh ecosystem. It was a hyper-competitive biological meat grinder. And they were at the very bottom of the food chain. They were too slow, too blind, and too fragile. By day 18, the psychological toll was devastating. They sat in the dim, emergency-lit hull of the crashed Horizon, 7, hollow-eyed, and waiting for the inevitable. The perimeter alarms they had rigged, using salvaged wiring from the Boeing thrusters, tripped constantly, usually triggered by large, slithering shadows just beyond the tree line. The predators were testing the perimeter, waiting for the survivors to grow too weak to fire their rifles. We have to face reality, Chloe whispered one evening, her voice raspy from dehydration. She was looking at Captain Richard, whose uniform hung off his emaciated frame. The distress beacon is lost. The team is dead. We have maybe 3 days of water left, and I haven't slept in a week. We are going to die in this green hell. Richard didn't argue. He just stared at the reinforced glass of the viewport, watching a massive, centipede-like creature with translucent armor crawl over the hull. I know, he said softly. I just hope whatever got Arthur and the others made it quick. On day 21, the jungle went entirely silent. The omnipresent low-frequency hum stopped. The rustling of the creeping vines ceased. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. Inside the wreckage, Beckett weakly lifted his head. "Do you hear that?" "I don't hear anything," Chloe muttered, clutching her empty stomach. "Exactly. The perimeter. The scavengers are gone." Suddenly, a heavy, rhythmic thudding echoed from the tree line. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the erratic scrambling of an alien beast. It was deliberate, measured, bipedal. Captain Richard forced himself to his feet, drawing his heavy plasma pistol with shaking hands. "Arm yourselves," he croaked to the others. "Something massive is approaching." The 6 survivors dragged themselves to the breach in the hull, leveling their weapons at the dense wall of ferns. The thudding grew louder. The colossal leaves parted, snapping thick branches out of the way as if they were twigs. Whatever had wiped out the expedition team, whatever apex nightmare ruled this sector of Acheron, 4, had finally come to finish off the rest of them. Chloe closed her eyes, preparing for the end. Then, a voice called out from the shadows. "Don't shoot. I swear to God, Richard, if you shoot me after I walk 12 miles through this godforsaken swamp, I'm going to be incredibly upset." The voice was undeniably human, raspy with exhaustion, but laced with a dry, unmistakable sarcasm. Captain Richard's plasma pistol wavered. Chloe gasped, her hands flying to her face. Through the dense curtain of broadleaf ferns stepped Nathaniel Locke. To call him a survivor would be an understatement. He looked like he had conquered the ecosystem. His standard-issue Bradford Lowell jumpsuit was gone, replaced by thick, makeshift armor. He had salvaged ceramic heat plating from the crashed Boeing Yamaha thruster casings, lashing them to his chest and forearms using highly tensile, glowing blue vines. His face was smeared with a thick paste of gray mud and crushed charcoal, breaking up his human silhouette. But it wasn't Locke's improvised gladiator attire that paralyzed the camp. In his left hand, Locke carried a large, expertly woven basket made of dried reeds, overflowing with bright, violet fruits and what looked like thick slabs of smoked meat. In his right hand, he held a leash braided from the ship's internal fiber optic cabling. At the end of that leash was a nightmare. It stood waist-high to Locke, a quadrupedal beast composed entirely of whipcord muscle, obsidian black scales, and a tail that ended in a heavy, spiked club. It had 6 glowing, golden eyes, arranged in a V pattern on its angular skull, and when it opened its maw to pant in the humid air, it revealed rows of translucent, serrated teeth that looked entirely capable of biting through a titanium bulkhead. "Don't shoot," Locke repeated, casually swatting a fist-sized, venomous mosquito away from his neck as if it were a minor nuisance. He tugged gently on the fiber optic leash. "Sit, Barnaby. Behave. These are friends." The apex predator of a class, 9 Deathworld, let out a sound somewhere between a panther's growl and a purr, circled twice in the mud, and obediently sat on its haunches. It looked at the terrified survivors and tilted its head, its tail thumping rhythmically against the dirt. Beckett let out a strangled noise, dropping his rifle. What in the name of God is that?" "This is Barnaby," Locke said casually, walking forward and setting the heavy basket down in the center of the camp. "He's a juvenile, I think. Local equivalent of a hunting hound. He likes belly rubs and the soft cartilage behind the ears. Don't touch his tail, though. He gets startled. Locke." Captain Richard lowered his weapon, his voice trembling as he stepped out of the shadows of the wreckage. He looked at the basket, then at the beast, then up at Locke's mud-streaked face. "The team. Arthur. Simon. The others. Are they?" Locke's casual demeanor evaporated. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he reached up to wipe a smear of grime from his forehead. Gone. All 11 of them. I'm sorry, Captain. Chloe collapsed to her knees, sobbing quietly into her hands. The hope they had clung to for 3 weeks finally shattered. What happened? Richard asked, his voice hollow. We heard the radio feed. It sounded like a slaughter. It was, Locke said, his tone turning grim as he knelt and began pulling items from his basket. Here, eat this. The violet fruit is safe. I watched the local herbivores eat it for 3 days before I tried it. The meat is from a giant, amphibious rodent thing we tracked down near the river. It's cooked. Eat slow, or your stomachs will reject it. As the starving survivors fell upon the food, weeping as the sweet, nutritious fruit hit their tongues, Locke sat on a salvaged ammunition crate and told his story. It wasn't a biological failure. It was a technological one, Locke explained, tossing a piece of dried meat to Barnaby, who caught it midair with a terrifying snap of his jaws. The Bradford Lowell gear is top of the line for civilized space. But out here, the thermal scopes, the active radar pings, the plasma battery hum. We were walking through a dark forest, wearing strobe lights and screaming. He pointed a finger at the dense canopy above. The apex predators, here, I call them, stalkers, are blind. They don't use conventional eyesight. They hunt by detecting electromagnetic fields and localized heat signatures. When Arthur turned on the high-gain comms to ping the camp, it was like ringing a dinner bell. Locke described the ambush. The stalker, a massive, arboreal nightmare, roughly the size of a Caterpillar dump truck, had dropped from the shattered canopy with zero warning. It didn't roar. It moved in absolute, terrifying silence. It took Leonard first, crushed him before he could pull the trigger, Locke said softly, staring into the mud. Arthur panicked. He ordered everyone to open fire. Plasma bolts flying everywhere. It just heated up the immediate area, confusing their own optics and giving the stalker a massive thermal bloom to attack. I yelled at them to power down, to drop their gear and get into the mud to mask their heat, but discipline broke. Locke had thrown his rifle into a nearby acidic swamp to draw the creature's attention away, diving into a thick mud wallow. He watched from the muck as the beast dismantled the heavily armed expedition team in under 90 seconds. When it was over, the creature had gathered the bodies and dragged them back up into the canopy. I was alone, Locke continued. I had no rifle, no comms, just my old Marine Corps KA bar knife, a titanium pry bar, and a lot of mud. How are you alive? Beckett asked, his mouth full of roasted alien meat. It's been 18 days since the attack. Humans are the ultimate endurance hunters, Beckett, Locke said, a fierce spark returning to his eyes. We evolved on a death world of our own. Earth used to be a nightmare before we paved it. I stripped off the tech. I stopped fighting the jungle and started adapting to it. I masked my scent with charcoal. I slept in the upper branches during the day and moved at night. And then I found Barnaby. Locke gestured to the six-eyed beast, resting its heavy, armored chin on his combat boots. About a week ago, I was tracking the signal from the Lockheed Martin distress beacon. I found this guy pinned under a fallen ironwood tree. His leg was crushed. The big stalkers were circling, waiting for him to die so they could scavenge him. I don't know why, but my brain went, look at that poor ugly dog. Locke chuckled, rubbing the terrifying creature between its top set of eyes. Barnaby leaned into the touch, emitting a low, rumbling purr. I used the titanium pry bar to lever the tree off him, Locke said. I expected him to eat me. Instead, he limped after me. I splinted his leg, shared some of my rations with him, and, well, pack bonding. It's a uniquely human trait, it seems. We made a team. I have the opposable thumbs and the tactical brain. He has the sensory organs that let us know when a drop bear the size of a tank is looking at us. Captain Richard stared at the human cargo hauler, utterly bewildered. The United Earth Space Command spent trillions trying to tame the galaxy with plasma and steel. And here was a retired Marine who had conquered an alien ecosystem with a stick, some mud, and the primal human urge to pet an animal. You said you were tracking the distress beacon, Chloe said, her voice trembling with renewed hope. Did you find it? Locke reached into the deep pocket of his salvaged armor. He pulled out a heavy, cylindrical device branded with the faded Lockheed Martin Aerospace logo. The casing was dented, and several wires were exposed, but a small, faint green LED light was pulsing on its side. I found the aft cargo bay, Locke said, a grim smile spreading across his face. I found the beacon, but we have a problem. The canopy is too thick, Locke explained, laying the Lockheed Martin distress beacon on a relatively clean piece of the ship's bulkhead. He tapped the flashing green light. The signal is trying to punch through, but the atmospheric ionization caused by the local flora is acting like a Faraday cage. It's scattering the telemetry. Beckett, energized by the fresh food and water, crawled over to the device. He wiped the grease from his hands and squinted at the interface. The Boeing nav systems failed because of the same ionization. But this is military-grade hardware. If we can get it high enough above the shattered canopy, it can establish a direct line-of-sight uplink with the Perseus relay network. Define high enough, Captain Richard asked, his command persona finally returning now that he wasn't starving to death. Locke pointed westward, through a gap in the dense trees. In the far distance, barely visible through the perpetual green haze, stood a massive geological formation. It was a jagged spire of black basalt, rising sharply above the tree line like a spear thrusting into the toxic sky. I call it the Needle, Locke said. It's about 6 kilometers from here. It breaks the canopy layer completely. If we can get to the top of that ridge, we can plant the beacon, power it up to maximum gain, and scream for an evac. Chloe looked at the wounded, exhausted survivors. 6 kilometers? Through that? She gestured toward the jungle. We barely survived, staying inside a reinforced hull. If we walk out there, we'll be torn apart. You won't be, Locke said firmly. Because you're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. We are going to strip down. No plasma rifles, they emit too much heat. We rely on kinetic weapons only. Pistols, knives, machetes. We coat ourselves in the river mud. We move in single file. Barnaby will take point. At the mention of his name, the six-eyed stalker hound lifted his head, letting out a sharp, clicking bark. Are you insane? Simon, who had been quietly eating in the corner, finally spoke up. You want us to drop our high-tech weaponry and smear ourselves in dirt? That goes against every UESC survival protocol. UESC protocols got 11 people killed. Simon, Locke shot back, his voice snapping like a whip. You are on my ship now. The Horizon 7 is dead. My ship is made of mud, sweat, and absolute silence. If you want to live, you follow my lead. The authority in Locke's voice was absolute. He wasn't just a cargo hauler anymore. The jungle had stripped away the civilian veneer, revealing the hardened veteran beneath. Over the next 2 hours, the camp was transformed. Under Locke's strict supervision, the survivors dismantled the useless Boeing plasma rifles, salvaging the heavy, dense lithium cores. Locke showed them how to fashion rudimentary, heavy throwing spears using the ship's structural struts, weighting them with the cores. Chloe broke open her remaining medical kits, synthesizing a crude, pungent paste from the local flora that Locke swore would mask their pheromones. They stripped off their bright corporate jumpsuits, donning the dark, sweat-stained underlayers, and aggressively applied the mud and charcoal paste to their skin. By 1600 hours, they looked less like a corporate survey team and more like a primitive tribe preparing for war. All right, Locke said, looking over his ragtag crew. Rule number 1. No talking. Use hand signals. If Barnaby stops and lowers his tail, you freeze. You don't breathe. You don't blink. Rule number 2. If something attacks, you do not run. Running triggers a predator's chase reflex. You stand your ground, you make yourselves look big, and you use the spears. Clear? The crew nodded in silent agreement. Let's go home, Captain Richard whispered. The journey to the Needle was a grueling exercise in pure terror. The jungle of Acheron, 4, was hostile in ways they hadn't even imagined. Plants reacted to their passing, snapping shut with the force of bear traps. Spores drifted down like toxic snow, requiring them to wrap their faces in salvage cloth. But Locke was a master guide. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his heavy frame, reading the micro-expressions of the alien hound at his side. Several times, Barnaby froze, the hair-like scales on his back standing perfectly erect. Locke would signal a halt, and the team would crouch in the mud, holding their breath as massive, unseen horrors slithered through the canopy above them, raining debris down on their heads. After 4 hours of agonizingly slow progress, they reached the base of the needle. The black basalt rock face was steep, slick, with phosphorescent moss, but heavily terraced, providing a treacherous but climbable path upward. The canopy breaks about 400 meters up, Locke whispered, pointing to a ledge near the summit. We make that climb, we plant the beacon, and we wait for the cavalry. They began the ascent. The air grew thinner, the oppressive humidity giving way to a biting, ozone-rich wind. As they climbed higher, breaking through the first layer of the shattered canopy, the true scale of Acheron 4 revealed itself. An endless ocean of violent, rolling green stretched out to the horizon beneath a sky painted in bruised purples and toxic yellows. Beckett, panting heavily, was the first to pull himself onto the broad, flat ledge near the peak. Richard and Chloe followed, dragging their exhausted bodies onto the stone. Locke came up last, helping Barnaby scramble up the final steep incline. "We made it," Chloe gasped, tears streaking through the mud on her face. "My God, we actually made it." Locke didn't celebrate. He immediately moved to the center of the ledge, pulling the Lockheed Martin beacon from his pack. "Beckett, get over here. Initiate the bypass protocol. We need to broadcast now." Beckett scrambled over, pulling a multi-tool from his belt and quickly stripping the wires of the beacon. He connected them to a salvaged power cell, his fingers flying over the manual override dial. "I'm setting it to analog frequency burst. It's going to take a minute to warm up the transmitter." "Do it faster," Locke said, his eyes scanning the tree line far below them. Suddenly, Barnaby let out a sound none of them had heard before. It wasn't a growl, and it wasn't a bark. It was a high-pitched, vibrating whine, a sound of absolute primal panic. The alien hound backed away from the edge of the cliff, its tail tucked firmly between its legs, its 6 eyes wide with terror. "Locke?" Richard asked, his voice tightening. "What's wrong with him?" Locke drew his massive Ka-bar knife, stepping between the crew and the edge of the cliff. The wind suddenly died down. The omnipresent hum of the jungle below silenced completely. The signal, Locke realized, his blood running cold. "Beckett, how much electromagnetic noise is that beacon putting out?" "It's a deep space transponder, Locke. It's screaming into the void at 50 gigahertz. It's the brightest electromagnetic light bulb on the planet right now." A heavy, sickening thud echoed from the rock face below them, then another. The massive basalt spire vibrated beneath their boots. Something impossibly large was climbing the needle. Locke tightened his grip on the knife, his eyes locking onto the edge of the cliff. "Get the beacon online, Beckett. Now, the Alpha is here." The basalt ledge trembled violently beneath their boots. The rhythmic, heavy thudding against the side of the needle was no longer just a sound. It was a localized earthquake. Pebbles vibrated off the edge, tumbling into the emerald abyss below. "Beckett, how much longer on that uplink?" Locke barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. He stood perfectly still between the crew and the cliff edge, the heavy Ka-bar knife gleaming in his right hand, a kinetic spear gripped tightly in his left. "The Lockheed Martin mainframe is ancient," Beckett screamed, his fingers frantically punching commands into the battered interface. The green LED had turned into a blinding, strobing white light. "It's trying to handshake with the Perseus relay network. But the atmospheric ionization is fighting the signal. I need 90 seconds. Just give me 90 seconds. "We don't have 90 seconds, Richard whispered, his plasma pistol trembling as he aimed it at the empty air beyond the ledge. A claw, the size of a shuttle landing strut, slammed onto the stone. It was composed of jagged, obsidian-like chitin, ending in a curved hook that dug deeply into the solid basalt, cracking the rock like brittle glass. Then came a second claw, slowly, with the horrifying grace of a predator that knew it had absolutely nothing to fear. The alpha stalker pulled itself onto the summit. Chloe let out a whimpering gasp, collapsing backward against the cliff wall. The beast was a living monument to the cruelty of Acheron, 4's ecosystem. It was easily 3 times the size of the stalker that had decimated the expedition team. Its body was a heavily armored, elongated nightmare of pulsing muscle and thick, overlapping plates. It possessed no visible eyes. Instead, the front of its wedge-shaped skull was lined with deep, glowing crimson sensory pits, highly evolved thermal and electromagnetic receptors. Saliva, highly acidic and smoking as it hit the stone, dripped from a jaw unhinged to reveal rows of serrated, translucent teeth. The creature didn't look at them. It couldn't. Instead, its massive head swept back and forth, zeroing in on the brightest electromagnetic source for 1,000 miles. The blinding, high-gain pulse of the distress beacon. Barnaby, the juvenile hound, let out a terrified, high-pitched whine. His survival instincts were screaming at him to flee, to dive off the cliff and take his chances in the canopy. But he didn't run. He planted his forepaws firmly in the mud and stone beside Locke, the hair along his spine standing perfectly erect, and unleashed a defiant, rattling roar at the alpha. "Good boy," Locke murmured, his eyes locked on the behemoth. "Hold the line." The alpha registered the sound. It snapped its massive head toward Barnaby and Locke, its crimson sensory pits flaring brightly. Then, it lunged. It moved with a speed that defied its massive bulk. The beast closed the distance in a fraction of a second, its jaw snapping shut right where Locke had been standing, but Locke was already gone. Drawing on a decade of Marine Corps muscle memory and the primal, adrenaline-fueled instincts he had honed in the jungle, he dropped into a slide, slashing his Ka bar across the unarmored joint of the beast's foreleg. Thick, blue blood sprayed across the rock. The alpha let out a deafening, metallic shriek, a sound like tearing sheet metal that forced Richard and Simon to drop to their knees, clutching their ears. "Do not fire your plasma weapons." Locke roared over the din, rolling to his feet and brandishing his kinetic spear. "Richard, if you pull that trigger, you'll blind yourselves and give it a thermal target. Use the spears." The alpha whipped its massive tail around, a heavy club of spiked chitin that struck the stone where Barnaby was dodging. The shockwave threw the juvenile hound into the air, sending him crashing hard against the rock face. Barnaby whimpered, struggling to rise. Seeing his companion injured triggered something deeply, fundamentally human inside Locke. It was the ancient, pack-bonding fury that had allowed humanity to tame wolves in the freezing dark of Earth's prehistory. "Hey, ugly," Locke screamed, stepping directly in front of the flashing beacon to shield it with his own body. He banged the titanium shaft of his spear against the basalt. "Right here," the alpha turned, its sensory pits overloading from the proximity to the beacon and Locke's rapidly spiking body heat. It reared up on its hind legs, casting a terrifying, jagged shadow over the entire camp, preparing to bring its full weight down to crush the annoying human into paste. "Beckett," Locke yelled. "Signal locked!" Beckett screamed triumphantly, tears streaming down his face as the console beeped a steady, continuous tone. "Uplink established." UESC automated response triggered. "Good, now hit the deck." As the colossal beast brought its claws down, Locke didn't dodge. Instead, he reached into his makeshift armor and pulled out the salvaged lithium core from the Boeing thruster, a dense, unstable cylinder of raw energy he had rigged with a manual bypass during their climb. Locke drove his heavy kinetic spear upward, planting the butt of the weapon firmly into a crack in the stone, creating a braced pike. As the alpha fell upon him, its chest impaled itself on the titanium shaft. The beast shrieked, its momentum halted just inches from Locke's face, its snapping jaws spraying acidic saliva across Locke's mud-caked armor. With his free hand, Locke jammed the destabilized lithium core directly into the open, bleeding wound on the beast's chest, right where the spear had penetrated. "Eat Boeing, you son of a bitch," Locke grunted, twisting the manual bypass dial to overload. Locke threw himself backward, diving over the frantic Beckett and tackling Chloe to the ground. "Cover your eyes!" The lithium core detonated. It wasn't a fiery explosion, but a violent, blinding shockwave of pure thermal and electromagnetic energy. The blast threw the survivors against the cliff wall, raining gravel and dust down upon them. When the blinding white light faded, the ledge was eerily silent. The Alpha Stalker lay motionless in the center of the plateau. The localized EM burst had completely fried its central nervous system, instantly killing the apex predator. Its massive body smoked in the cool, high-altitude air. Locke groaned, slowly pushing himself up from the rock. His ears were ringing, his makeshift armor was cracked, and he was bleeding from a dozen minor lacerations. But he was alive. A low whine broke the silence. Barnaby limped over from the edge of the cliff, his tail wagging hesitantly. He nudged Locke's shoulder with his heavy, scaly snout. Locke let out a breathless, exhausted laugh, wrapping his arm around the terrifying alien hound. "I'm okay, buddy. We got him. We got him." Richard, Chloe, Simon, and Beckett slowly stood up, staring in absolute awe at the dead behemoth, and then at the mud-covered cargo hauler who had just slain a Deathworld god with a stick and a battery. Before anyone could speak, a new sound pierced the sky. It wasn't the roar of a beast, but the deep, mechanical thrum of heavily armored thrusters. Breaking through the toxic, yellow clouds above them descended a colossal Northrop Grumman heavily armed dropship, its blue UESC insignia gleaming in the harsh light. The heavy cannons tracked the perimeter, while a voice boomed from the ship's external speakers. "UESC Rescue Actual, to distress beacon. We have your signal. Stand down and prepare for immediate medical evacuation. Repeat, prepare for evac." The dropship's ramp lowered as it hovered just above the ledge. A squad of heavily armored space marines rushed out, plasma rifles raised, expecting to find a slaughtered crew. Instead, they found 5 weeping, mud-covered survivors and a fiercely grinning cargo specialist casually petting a 6-eyed apex predator. The lead marine lowered his rifle, staring at the dead Alpha, then at Barnaby, and finally at Locke. "What the hell happened down here?" Locke patted Barnaby's heavy, armored head, looking back at the bewildered rescue team. "Just taking the dog for a walk, Corporal. Let's go home." The Acheron 4 incident fundamentally rewrote UESC survival protocols. Humanity learned that surviving a Deathworld didn't always require orbital bombardments or heavy plasma fire. Sometimes, true survival meant stripping away the advanced technology, embracing the primal mud, and relying on mankind's oldest, most terrifying evolutionary advantage: the sheer, stubborn will to adapt, and our unique, undeniable ability to turn a planet's apex predator into man's absolute best friend.